CNC Podcast. I'm your host, Justin McRoberts. This is your co-host, Dan Portnoy. We are getting our virtual neighbors. We're getting our schedules together. Dan and I, we're somewhat sure this is when we're supposed to do this today. The professionals, y'all, we act just like everyone else. Is this now, or is this later? I think it's later. Let's just do now. Now works. I figured out what I was trying to say, Dan, is we should do this on the 15th in the afternoon, because on the 15th in the morning I'm having a root canal. And I think that could be fantastic.
I don't know if that's going to be a great podcast time.
I said I was scheduling the root canal, and I said, she said, we've got it available on the morning of the 15th, and I have a speaking engagement on the morning of the 17th.
Yeah.
And so she's like, hey, can you do the 15th in the morning? I was like, yeah. Wait, hold on a minute. 15th, huh? I said, have you seen The West Wing? And she said, no. And the first thing that popped in my mind, do you know this episode where the press secretary gets a root canal?
Right.
And she can't, Allison Janney, who's the actress, right. I can't remember, CJ Craig. Yep. CJ can't do the presser, and so Josh Lyman has to do it. Yeah, it's a great episode, but
he's not good at it.
He's not good at it. But it's the very first thing that I thought of when she was like, "Can you do the 15th?" I was like, "Yes." Will Josh Lyman have to do my speaking engagement on the 17th? Because that was the first thing I thought of. I've got not too much. I have a lot of West Wing floating around the old noggin.
Yeah, I don't think that's bad. I think that's good. It was a great show.
It was a great show. It was never the same after Sorkin left. Season 8 was not, or season 7 was not bad. Season 5 was weird. Season 6 was, but seasons 1, 2, and 3 were some of the best television ever.
Kapow! Yeah,
it was fantastic. Well, we're not doing the West Wing. We should do a West Wing. Oh, there have been better West Wing podcasts. We are on chapter 10 of the book Sacred Strides. So if you've been following along, Dan and I have been walking through the book Sacred Strides, released last summer. Going chapter by chapter, talking about the stuff between the stuff, the things between the lines and the backstories and all that kind of stuff. And Dan has been working with me for many, many years, and I with Dan, and he has a unique perspective on the work I do and what I do with it. And so it's been fun for Dan to poke into these chapters and pull out some questions that draw out a little extra. This is chapter 10. And again, the dual title, Quitting the Race for Good. The other alternate title is Disconnect and Repair.
Yeah. So, and I feel like you start in this, you start with an IT Crowd reference in this chapter. I don't know if you're a big IT Crowd fan.
I'm a big fan. I'm a huge fan. I love these people. Yes. I need them in my life.
Yes. So it's we're talking about technology right off the bat. So why don't you tell us where technology, and use it as a metaphor for most of the chapter here. So
yeah,
tell us about technology.
Well, I don't know how much of this we've talked about on the podcast, but I am he of whom it is said, I've never seen that before. That's my history. One of my histories with technology is I'm the guy, you know this as well as just about anyone. I have the weirdest issues with tech.
Yes.
It's never, we're in it right now. Dan, we've been in it right now. My website has been hacked more times than any one site that I know of personally. Like, I know that sites get hacked. Like, real sites get hacked and there are attacks all the time.
Yeah.
JustinMcRoberts.com has gone down no fewer than like 6 or 7 times that I can think of. And oftentimes it's not just like some weird, like odd detectable server issue.
Yes.
It's attacked. It's hijacked. At one point it was hijacked by someone who was doing something relatively nefarious, and they replaced my landing page with like that Norwegian death metal band. Remember
that? Just sounds fun though. That's a fun hacker.
That sounds like a fun hack. Sometimes it's fun, but that's been my history with tech. And I end up with such like odd things. All of my tech knowledge comes from having to figure out weird issues. So that's one bit of my relationship to tech. The other one is like, I really am kind of I am not a Luddite. I'm a fan of tech and technology. I love it. I don't, but I'm a bit of a not a bit of I try to be a bit of a minimalist with it. Like I don't like getting tangled up in tech. Andy Crouch wrote a great book. I think it's called The Life We Want or The Life We Desire, in which he makes this distinction between, like using technology as a tool versus using it. And I can't remember the phrase he uses, but at some point, like, we're being sort of used, and tech is sort of running everything. And like tech is making decisions for me, and I'm subservient to like the rhythms and what have you of tech. And that stuff legit scares me. So I apply myself to the use of technology, not as not almost as little as possible. I still, I don't like being as dependent, and so that those are kind of some precursors to a conversation about technology and the way our brains work and the way we work like tech does.
Yes.
Yes.
So my favorite actually of the tech blunders was you trying to publish CMYK. That was probably my most favorite tech blunder of the entire ever. I've never.
Yeah.
How many rounds was that before you actually got into the figuring out why the thing wasn't printing right?
It was like 12 rounds.
12 rounds.
So
and each time there was a round meant you were on the phone, right?
Yep.
And then you'd have to upload a file. They would have to approve it, right? There was some sort of
it was a 3-day process every time. So for those who haven't been playing along since 2010, the first book I published was a book called CMYK, The Process of Life Together. And we, my art director friend at the time named Greg, we set out to do a pretty significant project. And the book we released was this massive full color Titanic of a thing.
That was a big swing.
It was a huge swing. I came out big. And we were using what is now called Kindle Direct Publishing. At the time, Amazon had conscripted a thing, conscripted a company called CreateSpace.
Right.
And CreateSpace had a partnership with Amazon that if you work with CreateSpace, they would create the file, they would digitize the file, they would etc. And then you would be in the Amazon Marketplace. And they had this upload process that you would set your stuff up. They give you all the parameters, and you would upload your file. And then they would give you all the, hey, here the all the triggers that our machine is giving this. And it took us at least 12 rounds and we kept getting the same warnings and then similar warnings until we finally figured out what was actually going on. But because it was 3 days every time, 12 rounds meant that the project was a month and a half behind promised deadline, and not because it wasn't done.
I thought it was way more than that.
Well, there were other factors. Like the overall, the project was way behind, but
yeah.
But that publishing part of it was at least a month and a half, because it was just tech. It was literally just like there was coding like off.
Well, wasn't there also some bad faith?
Yeah.
From a gentleman of sorts on their end that decided to just bone you.
I might have yelled at a customer service agent. And
that's where you win right there. That's where you're going to win friends and influence people.
Man, I yelled at a customer service agent, and because I was getting frustrated and I was exhausted and tired, and I was not as good a person as I am now. and he, that is the other side of the story. Well, that's the underside of the story, is that he went ahead and I'll make a medium story shorter, is the book is 6 by 9. Like those the parameters for the book.
Right.
And after I blew him up over the phone, he reframed the parameters of the upload so that it was set for 8 by 5.5 or something like that. So that
5.5 by 8.5
or 5. Yeah, sure. So that by the time, that's how good I am at this. So every single time the book hit the CreateSpace machine, it was like, yeah, this is wrong. and he legit sabotaged like our process for weeks on end because that's not really a tech problem, that's an attitude problem. But I definitely did that. I definitely blew him up, and he definitely sabotaged the book for weeks on
that's
end.
pretty. But yeah, you can't control that. That is just that. When that finally came out after the multiple months of the back and forth, and it was just like, why is this not working?
Oh,
How is this not working? And just being on the sidelines and watching that happen, and then like, oh, it's because this guy changed one parameter that no one thought to look at, and the fact that it was even found
oh.
is
I
kind of,
made an enemy of someone who could have been helping me.
yes, which is always why you don't yell at
Don't
um,
don't yell at the customer service
people
guys.
that help you, and secretaries
All that.
and janitors, and
Any of them.
yes, you make them your friends. You make them
So,
your friends.
so there's a bit of tech
So
in
there
this
you
chapter.
were. Yes. So one of the things, you use a metaphor, you talk about Bluetooth quite a bit. So you talk about connecting with Bluetooth
Yeah.
and Bluetooth. Did you know that the Bluetooth symbol is actually a Norse rune?
No?
Yeah, it really is. Like if you look at your
What does
Bluetooth,
it
like
mean?
if it's in the top of your
Yeah, I
thing,
got it right
that
here.
it's named after, it's literally named after a Viking.
The Bluetooth logo is a bind rune merging the younger Furtok runes, Hagal, and the Bjarkan or Bjarkan herald's initials. What?
Yeah.
Look at that. See? These ancient gods sneaking in.
Yeah, but also with the Bjarkan, whatever, you just build that at home and you put it next to your bed, and then it's a nice table.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great IKEA joke.
Yes. Well,
Oh.
you have to get them in there when you can. So Bluetooth, you start talking about connections and how things are kind of let to their own devices, in that you have to, depending on what you're doing,
Yeah.
things are dropping off and connecting back, and dropping off and connecting back.
Yeah. Yeah, the analogy here, I mean this is one of the chapters that almost didn't make the book because it's so different than the other chapters. It's a little more of a there is some story in the book, but it's more of an analogy, kind of a helpful piece, and it's about disconnection and like a rhythmic and intentional disconnection. So the analogy runs like this: that and most of us have had the situation like we'll be using a Bluetooth device, headset or otherwise, and at some point like it won't connect, like the phone or the computer just won't connect to the device, and it normally does. And in this scenario, like I was talking about, like I was on a run and I couldn't get the thing to connect. I couldn't get my headset to connect, and I was flipping through the options to get it fixed. And one of the options that the iOS gives me is to forget this device. That even once I've like turned Bluetooth off and turned it back on, disconnected, reconnected, at some point, like, and that sometimes works. Like it sometimes works to turn it off and turn it back on, or to disconnect and reconnect. But at some point, that connection is like so like malformed and so muddied by whatever happens in the Bluetooth world that the device needs to actually forget my device needs to actually forget the other device in order to reconnect in a way that like works again. And I actually feel like our souls work that way. That just like if you flip through your phone right now, it's possible. Like my phone, I think I'm okay right now, but like at some point you start flipping through and they're like 30 or 40 like Bluetooth connections. It's like
Oh,
if you
dang.
rent cars or fly around, like your phone or your device connects with this person's Bose speaker and this person's JBL and this headset and this old headset, and then you got all these connections. And at some point, like you really, any device, including the human soul, really can't maintain and remember all those connections and hold them. I eventually have to start eliminating some connections. Like some things I'm just never going to connect to this thing again, or maybe I shouldn't. And so I have to like, I have to pin down my connect or not pin. I have to pare down my connections. But the other part is there's some connections that I have that are so corrupted by use that I can't just disconnect for a moment. I actually have to like forget. I have to get to a point where I'm so disconnected that there's no real memory there anymore. So the reconnection actually feels more fundamentally new and not just practically new. That's the analogy. And this plays out in a whole bunch of different ways, but that was kind of the root of the thing was it is necessary to disconnect at times. And then even once we've disconnected and we begin to disconnect regularly, we figure out that there are some connections in our lives that are so deeply corrupt and so deeply problematic that we kind of have to forget that connection. And that's a deeper work.
Yeah. So, why the change? Just because there was why the adjustment in the chapter type? Because this is a little more. This is a little more spiritual. Like I feel like your language is a little more of the spiritual variety.
Yeah, yeah. So the story that goes well, the sort of backstory to this chapter goes like this: that early in the chapter, I reference that book we've talked about a few times, the Rest of God, Restoring Your Soul by Restoring the Sabbath book. And one of his suggestions about the implementation of Sabbath is to make a list of things. And I do this when I do workshops all the time, make a list of joys and obligations. And when I ran around doing the first round of that, like the things I do just in pure joy versus the things I do because I'm obliged to them, on my obligations list, I wrote down the words mentorship and counseling. I was working as a pastor at the time, and so I had all these relationships that were like more like mentorship relationships and kind of counseling relationships. And when I did that, I wasn't being entirely honest with like what I was feeling in my soul. So the words I used were mentorship and counseling. But what I was actually going through was that I just didn't have what I was going through was I was coming to grips with internally the reality that most of the relationships I was in were like deeply transactional, and that I wasn't in a bunch of like healthy exchange relationships, that I wasn't in a lot of life-giving relationships, that almost everything was like me in a position of power trying to offer some sort of help, and that the folks who were coming and being around me, even if it was, you know, in kindness in some way, they were there because they wanted or they needed things from me. And because I was so patterned, and this is what I mean by disconnection and then eventually forgetting, because I was so patterned at those kinds of relationships, that posture and that emotional energy was corrupting any opportunity I had to actually form relationships that weren't transactional. Because so many of my relationships for so long were deeply transactional, and specifically in the role of a pastor, like that's how my soul knew how to have relationship. So in order to break free, like it's a pop song, in order to no longer live there and live in that place, I had to not just like disconnect from certain people and take some, more regular breaks from certain things. I actually had to do like a real deep dive into my soul, into my life practices, into my calendar, and begin to forget how I was, begin to forget how I was and how I postured myself in relationship. And that kind of work takes much, much longer than just disconnecting.
Yeah, like a deprogramming of to get out of the pattern.
Yeah, and in my case, it meant not being a pastor anymore.
Oh wow!
Like I needed to not be in that role. That's as deep as that dive had to go for me. That's not the case for everyone. I think the pastorate can be a place where someone can work and live happily and healthily. I work with pastors to may help that be the case. But for me, that was a role and a position that like I had to forget. And so I had to not just like disconnect for a while, disconnect on the regular. I was doing that. I had to detach myself entirely and let my soul forget what it felt like to live in that posture with so many people, so that I could actually reconnect with folks in a healthy and actually deeply meaningful way again.
Yeah. So that's, and that had to be actually depressing.
The first part of it was, I mean, the recognition of it was, and again, this is why I use the analogy of the Bluetooth analogy, is that there's kind of, again, if you pop open I'm thinking of an iPhone. I don't know how it works on Androids or whatever, but like if I look at the list of Bluetooth connections on my phone, and it's like, 13, 14, 20, 25, 30, 40 connections, socially, there's like a value on, like, look at all my friends. Like socially,
Right.
like there's this value, like here are all these connections I have. There's business connections, personal connections, kind of the middle ground connections, and having a whole big long list of names or connections, work connections, otherwise, like there's this, I guess, like sometimes it's not entirely bad, but there's this overvalue on, like, look at the list I have of things I'm doing, the people I'm related to, and all these connections. What became sad was I was so blinded by the number of connections that I had that I wasn't able to pay attention to the cost of my own soul. So it was sad for me to recognize, like, I'm actually exhausted by these things, and I can't be everything I'm supposed to be to all of these people in all these places. So that came with a bit of sadness. Relinquishing the role wasn't as sad in time as it was kind of a relief. So
Okay.
because my soul was as tired as it was, and this is true of bodies and souls, right? Like, it knew, like, my conscious mind, my trained conscious mind was like, yeah, keep driving, keep doing, keep acting, keep behaving, keep performing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're tired, get a nap in. My soul was like, no, we're not okay. So depression in this context, and we've talked about this a little bit, and this isn't always the case with depression, but depression in that context was very much this. Depression was, and this is the way, why am I blanking on his name? Jim Carrey talks about depression. Depression was my soul saying, I don't want to play this character anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. This can't be who I am. And there was initially, like, a disappointment, I think, that, like, I couldn't be the person that I was telling people that I wanted to be. I couldn't behave in the ways that I had promised to behave in the long run. But there was a deep relief. Just like when I disconnect my phone from all, like, it happens with networks. The network is connected like 12, 15 devices, and everything's moving a little bit more slowly. But when I can eliminate some of those connections, things happen a little bit more quickly, more smoothly, and that happened for my soul as well. I needed to relinquish this role so that I could, at a soul level, like, live more freely and more connected. So that actually felt good in time.
So what did you do when during that disconnect time? Like, how did you structure it any a certain way, or did you just say, we're taking a break?
I structured it somewhat. I mean, there were all kinds of things that I didn't know about what was going to happen on the other side of that disconnection, on the other side of that, the process of forgetting. Right. So I surrounded myself with some helpful people. So I talked to some mentors. Said, this is what's going on in my life. Keep, check in on me. I re-engaged with my therapist. Not like it had been like forever, but it had been about a year since I had been in like regular therapy. Re-engaged with my therapist, and then I got really serious about spiritual direction.
Nice.
So in a sense, I forged a few new connections that were, I guess this is really what was up. I forged a few new connections in which these people didn't need anything from me. I mean, the therapist needed money.
But that's usually how it goes.
I forged connections with folks who were going to be life-giving. And I put myself in a position to be intentionally cared for by other people for a season.
Nice. Because I think being a pastor is one of the toughest gigs. 100%. I know that, a lot of people think about, your giant pastors that are, in the news or whatever and flying around in their private jets and stuff. But that's not who I think about at all. I think it's totally, no, I think most pastors are slugging it out. And I think the toughest part is, we were actually talking about this Sunday, of just like a lot of times when people are done with a local church gathering or whatever, they kind of show up and they have a like a notebook worth of grievances that they're going to give on their way out, instead of they should have been giving them on the at the whole time. I mean, if there were real grievances, but I think two things. I think one, they should have been doing that. I think the other tough part is that I know some pastors are encouraged not to become friends with the people that are in their church, which I think is the weirdest thing. I don't know what seminary thought that was a good idea, but I think it's a terrible idea.
Yeah, it's a tough gig, man, because it's somewhere along the lines of 70% of pastors polled. There was a Harvard study a few years ago. 70% of pastors polled said they had no friends,
right?
And 80% of pastors said they had no close friends. Now, those are just the folks who are willing to confess and admit that. And let's just pair that underneath, like, those are the folks who recognize it, right? Because as a pastor, I thought I had friends. I thought there were people in my life who were actually friends. And then, like, when the shit hit the fan,
right?
No, they weren't. And those were, and that's what I mean by the sad part. Like, these were fundamentally transactional relationships, and I was receiving kindness, if I performed well.
Right.
So it was like everything else. It's a trick for pastors. It's a trick for leaders because, that is the nature of the relationship. Like, you didn't show up in town most of the time for a church leader, for any kind of leader. It's not like you showed up and started doing a thing and then a bunch of people got around you. No, it's the other way. It's not like you and your friends made a decision to do this thing, this project, and you were in it together from the outset. It's that you have a skill set. You provide a service, and people start surrounding you because you provide a service.
Right.
That becomes the cultural, institutional shape of those relationships. Is they're there because you do something they want.
Right.
That's a sad reality, but damn, it's a reality. And to be able to disconnect from those relationships on the regular, this is part of why Sabbath keeping and rest is so essential for folks who want to lead well in the long run, whether it's in religious setting or otherwise. To be able to disconnect from those relationships, to have the freedom to disconnect from those relationships, allows you to connect with those relationships in power and in strength. And then finding ways to forget as best you can, like, what it feels like to just constantly be used, and remember instead, like, your actual belovedness, to have ways to practice regularly just being loved and cared for by people who don't need shit from you at all. If we don't do that, then we end up in the situation we're in, where so many cats are burned out and tired, but want to do the job.
Yeah. Yeah. The burnout thing is super real. I don't know. I think there was something in that same Harvard study about that, the amount of burnout and the amount of guys and men and women who are leaving and then not coming back. And it's a rough go, I think. So if you see a pastor today, hug them. Anyway. Okay. So I like this quote that you say: Sabbath practice gave me the chance to hear and see and feel and know that while it may always be true that I am predominantly useful to the majority of people, I am fundamentally and immovably beloved by the one who holds my life together, which is what you're saying.
It's the heartbeat of the book. And it's a reality that is a practice reality. Part of what I'm getting at with this and with this specific chapter is I can only maintain so many connections in my life. I have to ensure that that I have regular connections with people and in places that remind me of my belovedness, because those other connections will just show up. I'm gonna be connected. If I'm a leader of any kind, if I have gifts and talents to any degree, connections with people who want to use what I've got in me are just going to happen. I have to intentionally be connected to sources that actually fundamentally love me at the root of me. Otherwise, my whole life will be made up of this noise of connection, and all of that gets muddy. That's the analogy, and that's the chapter.
And that's the chapter.
Dan, thanks.
Sure.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the At Sea podcast. If you are digging what we're up to, you should jump to heartsandsmindsbooks.com .com and buy Sacred Strides. I think Byron's got it on sale right now. I do know this. I'm not sure exactly when it is. I will post this on socials. I think that there will be a Kindle sale sometime in the next couple weeks. I think that it's going to be available for $1.99, which will be very exciting for people who don't want to spend money on good books. But Joe, go pick up Sacred Strides. And if you have picked up Sacred Strides, thank you for checking that out and continue to follow along with this journey between Dan and I. And until next time, bye.